The Great Sphinx of Giza, Egypt is undoubtedly one of the most recognizable objects on Earth, as virtually everyone alive today has seen or is otherwise aware of what is arguably the most iconic relics in the entire history of human civilizations. And you may have recently seen the remarkable headline circulating around the internet involving a potential game-changing discovery of an entire second Great Sphinx said to be buried and hidden underneath a large mound of sand on the Giza Plateau, mere steps away from the Great Pyramids, which was detected through the use of a new alleged scanning technology that converts synthetic aperture radar images taken from satellite, which is then combined with a new specialized software created by an Italian engineer named Filippo Biondi, that adjusts the SAR's images into a vibrational analysis referred to as synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography, which is said to be capable of detecting deep subsurface voids and structures in ways it's never been done before. At least that's what's been claimed, and by the way, this is the same technology and group of researchers that were involved in the mega viral headlines last year involving an alleged discovery of an ultra-massive subterranean complex of pillars located deep underneath the Giza Plateau, as I'm sure many, if not all of you, recall seeing or at least hearing about. And I will finally be sharing my thoughts on that later in this video. But first, the possibility of a second Great Sphinx existing on the Giza Plateau, essentially hidden for thousands of years, would be a truly astounding discovery in itself, as it would not only permanently change the very landscape and visual image we've had all this time as to what ancient Egypt is essentially supposed to look like, but this new potential discovery would also profoundly illustrate just how little we know about the ancient Egyptians and how much more is waiting to be discovered, even in 2026. So of course the question becomes, is this new scanning technology legitimate, and is there actually a second Great Sphinx waiting to be uncovered underneath this large mound of sand? Well, let me first mention that this new potential discovery should not be confused with the other so-called Second Sphinx that garnered attention several years ago, back in 2017, and is what most commonly shows up on search results if you research the topic of a Second Sphinx. This unique structure, when viewed at the right angle, does indeed have a remarkable resemblance to that of the Great Sphinx, which, by the way, this is located in the southern cemetery of the Giza Plateau, and here you can see its general location respective to the known Great Sphinx. However, when you examine this structure from all angles, it becomes readily apparent that it is not actually a sphinx, but rather an eroded and warped geological outcropping of limestone bedrock that has been used for multiple different tombs. You see, when you view it from above, and most importantly from the opposite side, you quickly realize that there is, well, no actual other side of it except for bedrock. And here you can see what would be the top of its head circled in yellow as seen from satellite. However, it's only from this one side and facing in this particular direction that it shares a resemblance to the Great Sphinx. In fact, here is a composite 3D image that shows the actual nature of the structure in its entirety. But make no mistake, it truly does look like this was once part of a head, intriguingly similar in nature to the actual Sphinx. And by the way, if you're curious, others have had the opportunity to view inside the locked gates that leads to the tombs that exist inside of it. Fascinating nonetheless, but as far as the new 2026 scan of a potential discovery of a second Sphinx that recently made headlines, these two are not the same thing, and I felt it was important to differentiate between them for anyone that takes it upon themselves to research this further without confusion. So, circling back to the recent scan which potentially identified the second Sphinx buried underneath this mound, it's important to first remember exactly how we found the Great Sphinx in modern times, which was completely buried up to its neck in sand. In fact, the process of digging it out in modern times only began in the year 1817, a lengthy process which eventually, a year later, led to a crucial discovery that was uncovered directly between the Sphinx's paws and is famously known today as the Sphinx Dream Stela, a large 15-ton slab of granite which seemingly depicts two separate and individual sphinxes facing in the opposite direction of one another, which, by the way, is the fundamental reason why many people believe in the existence of a second Sphinx in the first place. And its depiction of facing in the opposite direction of each other is rather interesting when we consider the supposed location of the second Sphinx, which is located just a few hundred meters west of the Great Pyramid, whereas the known Great Sphinx is located a few hundred meters to the east of the so-called Pyramid of Khafre, or Second Pyramid, and both seemingly facing away from each other, which some argue mirrors what is being depicted on the Dream Stela. But to be clear, archaeologists and Egyptologists adamantly state that this is simply symbolic duality, and that there is no second Sphinx, as the dream stela is merely showing the same Sphinx depicted twice, just as it shows two depictions of Thutmose IV, which is specifically annotated on the hieroglyphs on the dream stela itself. However, that does not necessarily disprove the existence of a potential second Sphinx, so let's take a moment to look at a few additional photos of this mound as seen from the air, which for reference is located just outside of the Western Cemetery. And let's also take a look and observe what it looks like from on the ground. These screenshots you're seeing here are from a video tour by a researcher named Trevor Grossi, who is part of the Archaeological Rescue Foundation. And to give you some perspective, this is the location on the mound where he's standing and the direction in which he's walking around it. It's clearly a very large mound of sand and far taller than the view that we observe from where he's standing, as this is basically on a tiered level that's barely halfway up. But from everything we can see from on the ground, as well as in these various aerial photos, it's obviously impossible to say one way or the other what's buried beneath it, if anything at all. And I have to say that I do find it rather curious that nobody would have already investigated, explored, or otherwise excavated this large mound of sand over all this time. After all, enormous undertaking took place to remove colossal amounts of sand across the Giza Plateau over the last few centuries when heavy excavations occurred. I mean, did nobody actually think to look underneath this giant heap of earth while exploring the Giza Plateau? So I did some additional research to find the earliest photographs ever taken of the Giza Plateau to see what this mound looked like back then. And this is where things get rather interesting. Take a look at this aerial photo from 1929, which was taken either from an early airplane or most likely from a blimp or Zeppelin, which was the most common form of aerial photography over the Giza Plateau in the 1920s and 30s. And now compare a satellite photo taken from virtually the same exact angle just a few years ago in 2021. Notice that the mound of sand did not exist at that time less than 100 years ago. How can this be? Well, as I mentioned, enormous undertaking took place over the last few hundred years to excavate the Giza Plateau, which included digging out the hundreds of structures surrounding the Great Pyramids. And to do that, archaeologists of that time utilized metal railway-like tracks to transport barrels of excavated sand and debris as they essentially uncovered the Giza Plateau. And they strategically dumped the sand into large lines of heaps, which became mounds. And you can see multiple examples of these heaps in this photo. Now, to go further, notice that the specific mound in question did not exist in 1929, but appears in a photograph from the next year in 1930 and has been there ever since. You see, something that is incredibly important to consider that few people have put much thought into in our more modern times is that even though we all fully understand that they of course had to dig out the Great Sphinx, but not many of us have likely paused to contemplate exactly where they would have placed all that sand. Additionally, many forget that it wasn't just the Sphinx consumed with sand, but if you look closely at the base of the pyramids in the background of these photos, you can see that they were heavily consumed with sand as well. Make no mistake, virtually all of the structures we see in Giza today had to be excavated from the immense amount of sands of time. So, to be completely honest, it truly appears that that is exactly what this specific mound of sand is, which would explain why nobody ever investigated below it, simply because there appeared to be nothing there when they chose this location to dump the heaps of sand from their excavation 100 years ago. Which means one of two things today. Either this scan is wrong and there's not actually a second Great Sphinx buried here at all, or two, the scan is correct and a potential Sphinx, or perhaps an archaeological structure of some kind, is buried well below the surface and was hidden to those that chose to dump this sand back in this spot in 1930. And let me also say that no, I do not think for a second that they would have purposely buried and hid a second Sphinx here in the 1920s and 30s, because let's be real, why would any archaeologist of that time not want to get credit for making a massive discovery such as this? And if we are to be more real, we have to acknowledge the fact that many excavations at that time were fueled by the financial desire to essentially loot ancient relics that would be taken out of the country and back to England, France, and Germany, and everywhere else around the world, as was incredibly common at that time. Because let's not forget that museums around the world today were filled with looted artifacts of ancient Egypt from over the last couple centuries. So with all these details considered, let's focus on what we know about the scanned image and the new alleged scanning technology itself. To put it into layman's terms to the best of my ability, the synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography takes pre-existing still images that were taken by synthetic aperture radar, just as you see an example of here, and then using these two-dimensional still images that were taken from some 400 miles up, they are then synthesized using Filippo Biondi's secret proprietary software that supposedly uses a micromotion estimation technique that detects super tiny vibrations that identifies internal spaces and structures that are well over 1,000 meters deep into the Earth. Now, all I can do is be completely honest, and I have to say that it is hard for me to imagine that structures can be identified over 1,000 meters deep, well over half a mile, from a still image, a two-dimensional still image. I mean, think about that. And for frame of reference, keep in mind that typical terrestrial ground-penetrating radar only penetrates from mere centimeters to a maximum depth of 15 meters. And that's using literal radar scans on the ground and not through subsequent analysis of a still image taken from orbit. So when we consider the highly provocative findings that Filippo Biondi has claimed to have discovered, which includes 8 vertical cylindrical wells that are said to be an astonishing 848 meters, or well over 2,100 feet deep, which are also said to be hollow on the inside with a seemingly external spiral staircase-like formation around them, honestly sounds too spectacular to be true. However, even if the alleged scan was wildly exaggerated, that does not mean that there aren't subterranean tunnels and chambers below Giza. However, something that must also be mentioned is that the Giza Plateau is known to have a large water table, or aquifer, that can be found just 50 feet down and extends hundreds of feet below the surface. In fact, you may recall Mr. Beast having swam in it when he made a video inside the Osiris shaft last year. And that's the thing, because synthetic aperture radar cannot typically scan through water, yet the Giza water table exists directly in between where the massive subterranean complex is said to be. Nevertheless, Biondi has explained that although his Doppler tomography does not send radar waves through water or deep rock, it does measure tiny natural microvibration on the Earth's surface that are caused by seismic waves, which allowed him to develop 3D images of what's below. At least that's what he's claimed. But of course, according to various experts, they say that that's not true and is simply not possible. And I have to admit that I do find it concerning that Filippo Biondi has not subjected his secret software to anyone else for independent verification or peer review. So as of right now, the world is taking his alleged capabilities and his history-changing discoveries on his own word. Another detail worth mentioning is that he has claimed to have validated his software's capability when he scanned the Gran Sasso National Laboratory in Italy, which has a known subterranean man-made complex deep beneath the mountain that it sits at the base of, which the skeptics raise concern over because, again, this is taken from Biondi's own goodwill, and what's to say that he didn't simply choose a site that has a known underground structure and then falsely claim he detected it through his own technology? I mean, how can it be a true independent test or a true blind discovery if the structure was already known to exist? And as far as his alleged discovery of a second Great Sphinx on the Giza Plateau, where things stand today is that Filippo Biondi will be holding a press conference in Italy on June 21st, where he made a bold claim of a 100% probability that a second Sphinx does indeed exist exactly where he claimed it does, and he will be releasing a high-resolution acoustic image of it at his press conference, which means that the world will have to wait another 2 months before seeing further evidence of what would be one of the most surprising and most important archaeological discoveries in modern times. Again, it would change the entire known landscape of the Giza Plateau forever. Now, like I said, all I can do is be honest. So although I admit that I do have significant doubts as to the validity of his claims, I do have to admit that, number one, I don't know. I mean, am I an expert in synthetic aperture radar? No. Are you? Probably not. So what really needs to happen is for Filippo Biondi to allow others to independently use his proprietary software to see if they come anywhere close to the same results. But I'll also say that even if his findings are greatly exaggerated, if anything significant is indeed buried beneath the Giza Plateau, that will be a game-changing discovery in itself. And I already do think that there are hidden tunnels beneath Giza. Legends exist of people walking 8 miles in underground tunnels from Giza to Saqqara as recently as just 50 to 60 years ago. In fact, Herodotus adamantly claimed some 2,400 years ago that a massive labyrinth exists underneath the Giza Plateau that makes the grandeur of the Great Pyramids pale in comparison. And regardless if this is true or not, there is ultimately only one way we will ever know for sure, which is if we dig and find out. Because even if Filippo Biondi allows independent peer-reviewed analysis and releases more scans of what appears to be the most compelling evidence on Earth that proves his technology is real, there will still be naysayers that won't believe it. That's just the world we live in. So, although I admittedly have doubts about some of his claims, I actually think that we should stop wasting any more time debating and should go drill down to see what we find. This is the simplest and quickest way to find out once and for all what lies below the Giza Plateau. Drill a simple hole, stick a camera down, and let's see what we see. Guys, it's 2026 and the world is what we make of it. Do we really want to sit around debating and arguing online to the end of time or for the rest of our lives about what if something exists below the Giza Plateau? I mean, the fact that there's legends that go back thousands of years to me that adamantly claim there's something down there is very interesting. And again, we are never going to know the truth unless we dig and find out. So although some people will probably criticize me for having doubts about his claims, I actually think it's healthy to have some skepticism, guys. But keep in mind, I am open-minded and I think that we should drill down regardless. Because again, even if some of his claims are exaggerated, it doesn't mean that there's nothing down there at all, and that would change the entire history of ancient civilizations as we know it. So although I adamantly think that we should drill and dig and find out, and I'm sure others will agree with that, the reality is that that is never going to happen without the approval of the powers that be within Egypt. And the only way that's going to happen is by putting public pressure on them to do so. And do not underestimate the power and the court of public opinion, as when you see my next video, it will profoundly illustrate that we, the people, the masses, actually have far more power and persuasion over the powers that be than most people realize. So look forward to my next video. So with all of that said, leave a comment and share your thoughts on everything that was discussed in this video. Do you think that something exists underneath Giza, whether it be a second Sphinx or a massive complex of subterranean pillars? Do you believe in Filippo Biondi's new alleged technology? And ultimately, I'm curious to hear everyone's thoughts on this. So with all of that said, my name is Jimmy Corsetti. My channel is called Bright Insight. Leave a comment and subscribe and hit the like button. And I'll see you all again with my next video in the next couple weeks. Take care, everyone.